For my sister's birthday, they flew her to London, threw a gala, and gave her a $7,000 watch. For mine, a half-eaten cake from the fridge and a text that said, "We totally forgot. Happy late birthday." I didn't yell. I just got up, took my spare key off the hook, and walked out. That night, while they toasted her on Instagram, I turned off my phone and booked a one-way flight they'll never know about. I, 26M, stared at the soggy piece of leftover cake on the paper plate my mother had just placed in front of me. The frosting had merged with what looked like yesterday's dinner remnants, and I could see bite marks along one edge. My birthday, 26 years old, and this was what I got. My phone buzzed with notifications from Instagram. Post after post of my sister's lavish London birthday celebration from 2 months ago flooded my feed. The 5-star hotel, the designer dress, that gleaming Rolex on her wrist worth more than my car. The caption read, "Our princess deserves the world." Mom stood in the kitchen doorway, not quite meeting my eyes. She mentioned something about completely forgetting the date, how busy work had been, how they'd make it up to me next year. The same promises I'd heard for the past decade. Dad didn't even look up from his newspaper. I took a breath, feeling that familiar knot in my stomach that had lived there since childhood. The golden child and the afterthought. Some families just work that way, I told myself for years. Some kids got London. Others got leftover cake. But something shifted that morning. Maybe it was turning 26. Maybe it was finally seeing the pattern so clearly laid out in buttercream and disappointment. I didn't raise my voice, didn't slam doors or demand explanations. I simply stood up, walked to the hook by the door, and removed my spare key. Mom asked where I was going. I told her I needed some air. She nodded absently, already moving back to her coffee and morning show. The key felt heavier than it should have as I placed it on the kitchen counter. 26 years of coming and going, of being available whenever they remembered I existed, of showing up for every family dinner where the conversation inevitably centered on my sister's latest achievement or adventure. I walked out of that house and kept walking. 3 blocks away, I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. The inheritance from Grandpa Joe sat there, untouched for 2 years. He'd left equal amounts to both his grandchildren. But while my sister had immediately splurged on a new car and vacation, I'd been saving mine. For what? I'd never been sure. Maybe for a moment exactly like this. The first flight out of town left at 11 p.m. One-way ticket to Seattle. I'd always wanted to see the Pacific Northwest, had talked about it countless times at family dinners. No one ever listened. I spent the day walking through the city, seeing familiar streets with new eyes. Every childhood memory seemed to reorganize itself in my mind. The birthday parties where I helped set up for her celebrations, but got an afterthought gathering for my own. The graduations where her achievements got framed photos on the mantle while my diploma went into a drawer. The holidays where relatives asked about her college, her job, her boyfriend, then turned to me with polite but vacant smiles. At 6 p.m., my phone started buzzing. Family dinner. I'd never missed one in 5 years of living in the same city. The texts started coming in around 6:30. Mom wondering where I was. Dad asking if I was still upset about the morning. My sister sending a laughing emoji with a message about me being dramatic. I turned off my phone. The airport felt like stepping into a different life. Gate 42B, boarding in 20 minutes. Around me, people hugged goodbye, families taking selfies, couples holding hands. Normal people with normal relationships, I imagined. People who didn't have to earn basic consideration. A week later, I found a small apartment in Capitol Hill and a job at a tech startup. Seattle felt like breathing after holding my breath for 26 years. The mountains, the coffee culture, the way strangers actually made eye contact and smiled. I kept my phone off for those first few days, letting myself exist without the constant weight of family expectations. When I finally powered it back on, I had 37 missed calls and countless texts. The progression was predictable. Confusion, then irritation, then genuine concern, then anger. Mom had called my workplace back home, learned I'd quit without notice. Dad had driven to my old apartment to find it empty. I called Mom that evening. She demanded to know what I thought I was doing, how I could just disappear like that, how worried they'd all been. I told her I was fine, that I'd moved to Seattle, that I had a job and an apartment. The silence stretched long enough that I thought the call had dropped. She asked why I hadn't told them I was leaving. I reminded her about the cake, about the forgotten birthday, about the 26 years of being an afterthought. She said I was being ridiculous, that everyone forgets things sometimes, that family was family. I asked her when my birthday was. The pause told me everything. 3 months passed. I threw myself into work, exploring the city, building a life that belonged entirely to me. I joined a hiking group, started learning photography, discovered I actually enjoyed cooking when it wasn't for family dinners where no one noticed what I made. My sister called in November. She'd gotten my number from Mom, said everyone was worried, said I was being selfish and dramatic. She couldn't understand why I'd run away over something so small. A forgotten birthday happened to everyone. I asked if she remembered her 24th birthday. She launched into details about the surprise party they'd thrown her, the weekend spa trip, the jewelry Dad had picked out specially. When I asked about my 24th, she went quiet. I told her about my new job, about the mountains I could see from my apartment window, about the photography class I'd signed up for. She listened with what felt like genuine confusion, as if the idea that I had interests and dreams separate from our family unit had never occurred to her. Christmas approached, and the pressure intensified. Mom called daily, describing elaborate plans for the holidays, assuming I'd come home like always. She mentioned they'd gotten me something special this year, really special, to make up for the birthday situation. I told her I'd made other plans. The hiking group was doing a winter camping trip. I'd never been camping in snow before. The explosion was immediate. How could I choose strangers over family? How could I be so cruel, so ungrateful? They'd given me everything, sacrificed for me, loved me my whole life. One forgotten birthday, and I was throwing it all away? I stayed calm, told her I loved her too, but that love shouldn't require me to accept scraps while watching someone else get feasts. She hung up. Dad called an hour later. The conversation was shorter, more direct. He said I was breaking Mom's heart, that this whole thing was childish, that I needed to come home and stop this nonsense. I asked him what he'd gotten me for my birthday. Any birthday in the past 5 years. He couldn't remember a single gift. January brought a different kind of call. My sister's voice was smaller, less certain. She'd been thinking about our conversation, she said. Really thinking. She wanted to understand why I'd left, why I was so angry. I wasn't angry anymore, I told her. Anger required energy I'd stopped wasting months ago. I was just finally living my own life. She asked what that meant. I described my apartment, my job, the friends I'd made, the photography exhibition I was planning to enter. She listened without interrupting, something that had never happened in our childhood. Then she said something that surprised me. She told me she'd always felt guilty about the attention she received, but had never known how to bring it up. She'd assumed I didn't mind, that I preferred being left alone. The revelation felt both hollow and significant. I told her I'd never preferred being left alone. I'd just learned not to expect anything else. Spring arrived with unexpected warmth and a job promotion. The startup was growing, and my supervisor recommended me for a management position. I'd never seen myself as a leader, but apparently years of accommodating difficult personalities had given me useful skills. The raise meant I could afford a better apartment, maybe even think about buying something. For the first time in my life, my future felt entirely my own to shape. Mom called on what would have been my first family dinner in 8 months. Her voice was different, quieter. She said she'd been looking through photo albums, really looking, and had started to notice patterns she'd never seen before. Birthday pictures where my sister was centered and I was barely visible in the frame. Christmas mornings where the pile of gifts was noticeably uneven. Graduation photos where my achievement was literally overshadowed by her celebration from the week before. She said she understood now why I'd left. She was sorry, truly sorry, for the years of taking me for granted. I believed her, but I also knew that understanding and changing were different things. Patterns that deep didn't shift because of one conversation or one moment of clarity. I told her I appreciated the apology, and I meant it. But I also told her that I was happy where I was, that I'd built something here that belonged to me. Summer brought my 27th birthday. I celebrated with my hiking group, 30 people who'd become genuine friends over the past year. We spent the day on Mount Rainier, and that evening they surprised me with a cake at my favorite restaurant. Not because they'd forgotten and needed to make up for it, because they wanted to celebrate me. My phone stayed on that day. Messages trickled in from family. Mom sent a long text with birthday wishes and updates about everyone back home. Dad's message was shorter but warmer than usual. My sister sent a photo of a gift she'd bought me, asking for my address so she could mail it. For the first time in a year, I missed them. Not the dynamics, not the patterns, but them. The people underneath all the dysfunction were still people I'd grown up with, people who'd shaped me even in their neglect. But missing someone and needing them in your life were different things. Update 1. That fall, my photography made it into a local gallery. 3 pieces from my hiking adventures, matted and framed, and hanging on a white wall with my name beside them. I stood in front of them opening night, glass of wine in hand, watching strangers examine my work with genuine interest. Mom called the day after she saw my Instagram post about the exhibition. She said she was proud of me, that she'd never known I was so talented. I thanked her, but couldn't shake the sadness that she was just learning about something I'd been passionate about for months. The conversation stayed surface level, polite. She updated me on family news, asked about my work, mentioned they were thinking about visiting Seattle sometime. I gave non-committal responses. The idea of them in my space, bringing the old dynamics into the life I'd built, felt suffocating. Winter marked a full year since I'd left. The anniversary passed quietly, marked only by my realization that I rarely thought about that morning anymore. The hurt had faded into something more like distant disappointment, the way you might remember a movie that let you down years ago. My sister called in February with news that surprised me. She'd started therapy, she said. Not because of our situation specifically, but because she'd been struggling with anxiety and perfectionism. During sessions, she'd started to understand how our family dynamics had affected both of us, just differently. She talked about the pressure she'd felt to be perfect, to justify all the attention and resources directed her way. How she'd developed an eating disorder in college, trying to maintain the image everyone expected. How she'd stayed in a terrible relationship for 2 years because admitting it was failing felt like admitting she was failing. I'd never considered that the golden child role came with its own prison. We talked for 2 hours, the longest conversation we'd had since childhood. She asked if I'd be willing to talk regularly, to try building a relationship separate from our family context. I said yes, cautiously. People could change, but slowly. Trust rebuilt itself brick by brick. Over the following months, we developed a rhythm. Weekly calls where we talked about our lives without the filter of family drama. She told me about her job, her struggles, her small victories. I shared my adventures, my work projects, my growing photography portfolio. Gradually, I started to see her as a person rather than a symbol of everything I'd missed out on. She wasn't responsible for our parents' choices, just as I wasn't responsible for their neglect. We'd both been children trying to navigate a system that valued one of us over the other. Update 2. My 28th birthday approached with less fanfare, but more genuine warmth. My Seattle friends planned a weekend camping trip, and my sister asked if she could call that day to wish me well. Mom sent a card that arrived exactly on time, with a handwritten note acknowledging the significance of the date and expressing hope that I was happy. I was happy, not the overwhelming joy people talked about in self-help books, but the steady contentment of a life that fit. Work that challenged me, friends who saw me clearly, hobbies that brought me peace, and slowly healing family relationships that no longer define my worth. The camping trip was perfect. Sitting around the fire that night, watching stars appear over the Cascade Mountains, I felt a gratitude so pure it almost hurt. Not for what I'd escaped, but for what I'd found. One of my friends asked how I'd ended up in Seattle, and I gave the short version. Left home after realizing I needed a change. People nodded without judgment, shared their own stories of geographical fresh starts and family complications. Normal people with normal problems, treating my experience as just another thread in the complex tapestry of human relationships. That night, I called my sister. She was at home, celebrating her own small victory, a promotion at work that she'd earned entirely on her own merit. We talked about our goals for the coming year, our shared love of photography, the possibility of her visiting Seattle in the spring. Then she said something that stayed with me. She told me she was proud of me for leaving, for building something that made me happy, for showing her that it was possible to step outside the roles we'd been assigned in childhood. I told her I was proud of her too, for the work she was doing to understand herself, for reaching out to rebuild our relationship, for recognizing that our parents' mistakes didn't have to define our future. Update 3. 2 years after that morning with the leftover cake, I bought a small house in Ballard with a view of the mountains and space for a darkroom. My photography had evolved from a hobby to a side business, with local tourism companies hiring me for promotional shoots. Mom visited that spring, her first trip to Seattle. I was nervous, worried she'd bring the old energy, the subtle demands and expectations. Instead, she spent 3 days genuinely trying to understand my life. She met my friends, admired my work, marveled at the mountains and the water and the coffee culture I'd grown to love. On her last evening, we sat on my deck watching the sunset paint the Olympics pink and gold. She apologized again, more specifically this time, for the years of taking me for granted. She said she'd been so focused on managing my sister's needs and drama that she'd assumed I was fine being overlooked. I accepted her apology because it felt genuine, and because holding on to old hurt would only poison the peace I'd found. But I also made it clear that our relationship would be different moving forward. I'd visit occasionally, participate in family events when it felt right, but Seattle was my home now. She understood, or said she did. Time would tell whether understanding translated into lasting change. My sister visited that summer, and we hiked Mount Pilchuck together, her first real mountain experience. Watching her face as we reached the summit, seeing her genuine amazement at the view, I felt something shift permanently in our relationship. We were becoming actual siblings rather than competitors in a game neither of us had chosen to play. The leftover cake morning felt like a story about someone else now, not erased, but integrated into a larger narrative about growing up and growing into yourself. Sometimes the most important journey begins with the smallest act of self-respect. That evening, as my sister and I cooked dinner together in my small kitchen, she mentioned something that made me smile. She said our parents had started therapy too, trying to understand their own patterns and mistakes. Change was slow but possible, apparently, even for people who'd spent decades locked in unhealthy dynamics. I didn't know if I'd ever fully trust them again, or if our relationships would ever feel truly balanced. But I'd learned that my happiness didn't depend on their transformation. It depended on my willingness to build a life that honored who I actually was, not who they needed me to be. 3,000 miles from that kitchen table, I'd found something more valuable than any birthday celebration or expensive gift. I'd found myself, and that was worth more than all the London trips and Rolex watches in the world.